Hi, and welcome to the 16th installment of the Dad Project. Glad to have you back, and tonight we will follow my dad, Pete Purvis, as he receives the call that every test pilot longs for. The call came as he lay in a hot, humid room in the Hotel La Luna in Cali, Colombia. The hotel switchboard rang him to let him know that he had a call from Los Estados Unidos, and that they were putting the caller through. The crackling voice on the other end said, "Hey Pete, Bob Smythe here. We met at the last SETP meeting in LA. Wondering if you'd like to join us here at Grumman for the F-14 test program. Spoke with Tank Sherman, and he said you'd be our guy. Interested?" That's total fiction. Like most things surrounding my dad's life as a pilot, I have no idea how he was approached. A call, a letter, a telegram, no idea. Not even if he was excited, but I know I was. As a youthful, dedicated reader of Proceedings, Aviation Week and Space Technology, and whatever other defense-related titles came through our postbox, I knew what the F-14 was. Way cool. So, where do we start? We'll start at the beginning, and that beginning will be well before we moved back to California in 1969. In Installment 11, I described the fighters that defined each major conflict, starting with the Sopwith Camel in World War I. Let's take another look at those planes with an emphasis on their size, armament, and performance. But before we do, we have to listen to Orson Welles recite John Gillespie's High Flight.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long delirious burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
If not for the many men that lost their lives flying and fighting in the Sopwith Camel, a comparison with a modern fighter would be comical. Its wood and fabric construction offered no protection for the pilot in a dogfight. It was difficult to fly and had no over-the-horizon capability. Its foe needed to be within eyesight of the pilot and then discernible enough to be identified as an enemy aircraft. The two Vickers machine guns had a range of over 2 miles, but other than firing at a retreating enemy aircraft, that range wasn't useful. It was small, 18 feet 9 inches long with a wingspan of 28 feet. It was pulled through the air with a Clerget rotary piston engine that generated 130 horsepower with a top speed of 113 miles per hour. Despite its demure, unimposing figure, it accounted for more than 1,294 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied fighter during the war. The intervening years from World War I to World War II saw the performance needle on fighter aircraft move very little. Tail-dragging biplanes with no retractable landing gear were still the order of the day, and the top speeds were little more than 230 miles an hour. Dimensionally, they were about the size of a Cessna 150. It wouldn't be until the end of the 30s that all-metal retractable gear monoplanes began to find their way into Air Force inventories. The German Me-109 and the British Spitfire would define the early years of World War II fighters, but it would be the American P51 Mustang, sporting a British-licensed Rolls-Royce engine, that would be the fighter that caught the public's imagination. Nearly twice the size as the Camel, with a wingspan of 37 feet and a fuselage 32 feet long, it bore holes through the sky at 440 miles an hour, while packing 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns that could be set to converge in front of the plane from 500 to 900 feet. Like the Camel, a dogfight was a very up-close and personal affair. With the Allies and the Soviets replete with their own jet research and the infusion of Nazi German jet research, the jet fighter age began in earnest soon after the end of World War II. It would be the F-86 Saber that would be the fighter that defined the Korean War. It was almost identical in size to the Mustang and carried the same armament. Like the fighters that came before it, the Saber pilots relied on their eyes to find and identify their foe. Unlike the fighters before them, the F-86 pilots were often vectored to their targets by ground or airborne radar, taking a good deal of the happenstance out of aerial engagements. With a top speed of over 688 miles per hour, dogfights could be joined, engaged, and left in the blink of an eye. The F-4 Phantom would be the fighter that defined the air war in Vietnam. It is also a perfect example of bad gouge and a poor reading of the tea leaves. Just about every military think tank was proclaiming the age of the dogfight over as they worked their way through the 50s. What would be needed would be interceptors with their own radar and missile systems to identify the Soviet bomber horde over the horizon. The interceptors would then fire their missiles, some nuclear-tipped, to take out the bears and bisons making their way for our shores. This thinking gave birth to many interceptors and ultimately the Phantom. It would be the first aircraft with a solid-state radar system complicated enough that it would require a radar intercept officer riding shotgun. Regrettably, the military thinkers were so sure of themselves that the Phantom arrived on Navy, Marine, and Air Force flight lines with no gun. It was also big. Its wingspan was about the same as the Mustang and the Saber, but nearly twice as long at 63 feet. Our demure, tiny Sopwith camel weighed in at 930 pounds in its knickers, while the Phantom sat unloaded at 30,300 pounds. The Phantom's top speed of Mach 2.3 at altitude topped the Camel's top speed of 113 miles per hour by a factor of about 13. With no major air war to fight following Vietnam, it wouldn't be a conflict that would pique the public's perception of an aircraft, but Hollywood. The last American pilot celebrated for his aerial daring do would be Robin Olds flying the F-4 in Vietnam. Following Olds, the next celebrated fighter pilot would be a fabrication, Pete Maverick Mitchell, flying the very real F-14 Tomcat. In many ways, the Tomcat overshadowed the cheesy grin and chiseled features of Maverick. The F-14 would define, for lack of a better term, the modern age of combat flying. Having flown the F-4 in Vietnam, my dad was very familiar with the airplane that the F-14 was to replace. So in July of 1971, my dad joined Grumman only a few months after the first flight of the F-14 on the 21st of December, 1970. The first flight a mere 22 months after the contract had been awarded in January of '69. At that point, the program was like any other defense contract, constantly under scrutiny with the very real prospect of being canceled. Compounding the scrutiny of the program was the recent Navy cancellation of their part in the Tactical Fighter Experimental, TFX. The aircraft that resulted from the TFX program was the F-111. The F-111A would make its mark in the USAF as a medium bomber. The Navy's version of the F-111 would be the B model and was intended as a Fleet Air Defense Fighter, FAD, to handle the over-the-horizon threats of Soviet bombers carrying anti-ship missiles. General Dynamics had been awarded the F-111 contract, but had partnered with Grumman for the B model because of their lack of experience with carrier-borne aircraft. By the time the F-111B was ready for carrier qualifications aboard the Coral Sea in July of '68, its weight had grown considerably and the TF-30 turbofan engines proved underpowered for the job. Its handling around the carrier proved unsatisfactory because of it. In congressional hearings in March 1968, Senator John Stennis wondered whether more powerful engines would cure the aircraft's woes. Then Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air Warfare, Vice Admiral Tom Connolly, responded with this soundbite: "There isn't enough power in all Christendom to make that airplane what we want." Continued work on the F-111B ceased in July of 1968. Unsatisfactory or not, the F-111B was big, heavy, and underpowered, a combination that proved dangerous around a carrier. Its performance as a fighter was also less than optimal, so its replacement should be other than that. Well, almost. The F-14 would be the largest and heaviest fighter ever deployed on a carrier, an honor that would have gone to the F-111B had it been deployed. The two aircraft were very similar in size, but the F-14 came in at 20,000 pounds lighter at a trim 61,000 pounds empty. But this was enough to make it into the fighter it would become. Earlier we looked at how the fighter had grown from the Sopwith Camel to the F-4 Phantom. The F-14 would take size and performance to the next level. With wings swept, the F-14 is about the same size as the F-4, but almost 15,000 pounds heavier. But the growth and size of the modern fighter is better illustrated with a comparison to the World War II era medium bomber, the B-25 Mitchell. With its wings unswept, the F-14's wings are only 3 feet shorter than the B-25 at 64 feet, while the F-14's fuselage is 10 feet longer than the B-25 at 62 feet and 23,000 pounds heavier empty. In other words, the modern carrier with its full complement of F-14s would have 24 B-25-sized aircraft called fighters at its disposal, while the Hornet just managed to launch 16 B-25 medium bombers on their one-way trip to Tokyo in 1941. The need for an FAD had not died with the F-111B. In fact, the VFX concept that would supersede the F-111B was initiated in November 1967, when Grumman submitted an unsolicited aircraft proposal to the Navy. Grumman, with its inside knowledge, had been hedging their bets knowing that the F-111B was not doing well and heading for cancellation. Grumman's proposal would be their Project 303 that was the genesis of the F-14. Anyone familiar with the acquisition of weapon systems knows that a program rarely disappears completely. This would be the case for many of the components used in the F-14. The Navy VFX RFP required a fighter with a 2-man crew sitting in tandem, 2 engines, an advanced weapon system with a powerful radar that could handle a variety of long, medium, and short-range high-performance air-to-air missiles, and thankfully, an internal gun. To that end, their design was worked around the missile and guidance system that was designed for the F-111B, the Hughes Aircraft AIM-54 Phoenix, partnered with their AN/AWG-9 guidance radar. Another unfortunate holdover from the F-111B would be the Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engine that fell short of the hoped-for 1-to-1 or better thrust-to-weight ratio. It also proved to be prone to compressor stalls at high angles of attack that could send the plane into a flat spin because of the severe asymmetry of the widely separated engine nacelles. Flat spins would account for the loss of 40 Tomcats, and it would kill the most famous radar intercept officer in the Navy, Goose. The most distinguishing feature of the Tomcat would also be a holdover from the F-111, the swing wing. However, the swing wing was not new to the F-111. An early effort to design an aircraft with a swing wing was the Messerschmitt P1101 that was being considered as a replacement for the Me-262. The oddity of the design is that the swing could only be accomplished on the ground. Like many Nazi German wartime programs, the documentation, the prototypes, and the engineers who did the work were swept up in Operation Paperclip and brought back to the United States. The Bell Aircraft Company took advantage of this knowledge, and its X-5 would be created by cannibalizing the captured P1101s to create 2 X-5s, the major difference being that the wing could be swept in flight. Being an X-plane, it was only being used as proof of concept, and much of the data that came out of the program would be used in the design of the F-111 and later the F-14. The swing wing was of interest to the Navy because of the ever higher landing speeds of jets on carriers. The swing wing could offset the divergent need for high-speed performance, the swept wing, while in the landing configuration, unswept, would allow for slower and more maneuverable approach speeds. Heeding that need, Grumman had earlier tried to introduce their own swing wing fighter known as the F-10F Jaguar in the early 50s. Surprisingly, the only successful aspect of the Jaguar was the borrowed X-5 swing wing mechanism. The only test pilot to test the plane, Grumman's Corky Meyer, described it as entertaining to fly because there was so much wrong with it. After only 32 test flights, the sole test aircraft died 1,000 deaths as a gunnery target. This was all background noise when my dad joined the Grumman test team. When my dad got new orders in the Navy, he would be gone before our house was packed and ready to move. His new position with Grumman would be no different. My mom was left to pack and manage our move back across the country to Thousand Oaks, California, while my dad made his way to Calverton, New York for his introduction to the shiny new Tomcat. When he arrived at Calverton, he was 36 years old, with a few thousand hours of flight time under his belt and well versed as a test pilot, but I can only imagine he felt like a kid in a candy store. But even with all that experience, he would not see the inside of a Tomcat in flight until 4 months after his start date on October 27th, when he would dutifully note 2.1 hours as co-pilot, despite the fact there was no control stick in the back seat to allow him to fly the plane even if he wanted to. Perhaps it was an extended NATOPS tour before that joyride, learning systems, studying systems, flying a simulator, getting coffee and lunch orders for the guys, volunteering for any stupid duty offered up, and itching for that first flight. That probably had something to do with that delay, but more likely was that by the time my dad arrived at Calverton in July 1971, the first prototype had already dramatically crashed just short of the runway at Calverton on December 30th, 1970. Bob Smythe and Bill Miller safely ejected the victims of a hydraulic failure. Sadly, Miller would die a year and a half later, on June 30th, 1972, when, while practicing in Tomcat No. 10 for an air show at Pax River, he inexplicably crashed into the Chesapeake Bay during a low, high-speed pass. The original prototype was intended for envelope expansion flights and high-speed testing. Its instrumentation was intended for that purpose, and therefore different from those airframes to follow. It wouldn't be until the 12th airframe, that would be redesignated 1X, that those tasks assigned to the original prototype could be completed. The test schedule had been thrown into disarray. With that setback, the second test bed would be hurried into rotation to take up the slack, while the third prototype was for non-destructive structural tests, and number 4 was just coming online and would be used for testing the Phoenix missile system. So, as my dad waited for number 5, the plane he would take to Point Mugu, just down the grade from Thousand Oaks, he was again flying his old friend, the F-4B, flying chase. Finally, on November 26, 1971, a blustery, typical fall day on Long Island, my dad strapped into the back seat of F-14 number 5, 157984. Hal Farley, who would later be the chief test pilot for Lockheed Martin, and who would take the F-117A for its first flight, would take number 5 up for its first flight. For 1.4 hours, they tooled around checking out systems, raising and lowering the landing gear, swinging the wings, and generally being sure all was well with this still rare bird. All proved well, and number 5 landed back at Calverton. While the plane was refueled and gone over by others, Hal and my dad debriefed, had a snack, and returned to number 5 for their pre-flight. But this time, my dad would be in the front seat, only the 8th pilot to be checked out, in one of the most gorgeous pieces of metal ever lofted toward the heavens. With the altimeter set to 30.16 inches of mercury, my dad took off for his first flight in the F-14, with Farley sitting in the back seat for moral support. For 1.6 hours, they flew in the pattern while my dad performed 12 FCLs. I'm sure if there was a tanker available, he would have had a wet plug or two just to keep flying. But, as I've mentioned before, test flying is a well-choreographed evolution of events. He probably had a stack of 3x5 cards that told him exactly how each of those 12 FCLs were to be performed. From starting altitude to angle of attack to approach speed, all in the name of data collection that would define the flight parameters and capabilities of the airplane as it made its way through the testing cycle. And, as mentioned before, they were already behind. Flight performance and weapons delivery are what are typically thought of when testing an aircraft. Most military pilots will talk about those aspects of their airplane, but will rarely mention how comfortable their airplane was. The F-14, however, was being designed for long-endurance missions of up to 6 hours in the airplane, and sitting on an ejection seat is akin to sitting on a brick. So, the cockpit design team ended up using Tempur-Pedic foam to make the cockpit more comfortable. Like every other aspect of the process, this needed to be tested, so they had volunteers sit in a mock-up for 6 to 12 hours to get the best configuration. My dad would be the first beneficiary of this effort when, on December 1st, 1971, on his 37th birthday, he and Marty LeChow were strapped into F-14 number 5. After performing 5 FCLs, they turned west for a 6.4-hour flight to Point Mugu in California. With the aid of a Marine KC-130, they did it all in one go, atop their Tempur-Pedic seat cushions. After a slow start in Calverton, it would be full steam ahead with the test program at Point Mugu. My dad would fly as little as 5 hours in a month, but typically, until his final flight in the F-14 in February of 1975, it would be anywhere from 15 to 30 hours of test flying a month. It would be a string of firsts, as any test program is, but it would be a second that would set my dad apart in the flying community. So, until next time, when we all enjoy the ever-sunny skies of Southern California, thanks for joining me for the 16th installment of the Dad Project. I continue to tell the stories I had hoped my father would tell me, and I appreciate you all being along for the journey. So, please subscribe if you'd like to hear more, and until next time, thanks for watching, and enjoy what life is giving you.